Good morning. So this is lesson 203, the Workbook of A Course in Miracles, and it's the review of lesson 183. And I'm gonna tell you something. I call upon God's name and my own. And in one sense, God, the word God is just the name. And I'm not really sure what to say about this lesson, because when I read it, I'm not a body, I am free, for I am still as God created me. It immediately brings me back to my experiences, and again, it's like the number of experiences doesn't matter when the experience comes to show you that you're not a body, that you are free, that you're still as God created you. It's the same. That's your natural condition. In other words, that's your reality. So it's not like, I don't know if this is going to make any sense. It's not like when we experience ourselves as God created us, it's a different experience than another time when we experience ourselves as God created us. It only seems that way because we seem to be locked in space and time, and these experiences come when we release ourselves, and we don't defend ourselves. There's a moment that's all when there are moments, and this seems to me to be the way it operates. There are moments that are built into our timeline that have the ability to potentiate the experiences that are capable of being had when we utilize the lessons of a Workbook of A Course in Miracles. Yet every time our mind shifts into the recognition of the truth of who we are, and not so sure this is what makes me laugh about this lesson. The name of God is my deliverance from every thought of evil and of sin, because there's my own as well as his. I call upon God's name and my own. When I call upon God's name and recognize it as my own, it's not like calling upon a name or a person in space and time. It's like recalling a totality of reality. It's calling it a totality of my being, which has, in a sense, no relationship to anything in space and time, including my body. And it offers me, and I don't know how to say this, I'm going to use a term, and I'm not even sure if the term is true. Okay, when I'm like in my ordinary, going about my day, and here it is, there's a moment, I'm not a body, I am free, I'm still as God created me. In one sense, it offers me, and I don't know if I'm going to use these terms the right way. I'm sure people will be able to disagree with me. It reminds me, it helps me to remember the truth of who I am experientially, as was given to me in the experiences I've had when I've realized the truth of who I am beyond the world of space and time. Now, every time I have that experience, it's not a new experience of it. It's what I've always been, the newness of what I've always been, dawning on me in my mind as if it's another time I had the experience, but it's more like I'm releasing the temporal sequencing to go into what is the true experience, the eternal experience, that which is what I truly am. So it's not like I have it again. It's I release myself to what I've always been and remain. And in that sense, we get more and more, we trust ourselves more and more. We trust what we realize ourselves to be more and more. And when and for me, now when I call upon God's name and on my own, it almost as if just the recognition, the call, gives me, in a sense, this safe psychological distance. Not in a sense of dissociation in a negative way, but a loosening of my sort of attachment to being in the world of space and time, and offers me this safe sort of psychological distance where in which I step back and can remember that this is, while this is seems to be going on around me, and what seems to be going on around me includes my body, it is not me, and it is the working out of the salvation of the world. Now, that's the way it is for me when I read a lesson such as this. I call upon God's name and on my own, because I don't recognize how do I say this? I recognize that we use the word God. And the word God now associates with the experience that I had when I was released from my identity as a body in space and time and entered into a totality of reality of experience that was all inclusive, in which I recognized I had been created eternally and infinitely, and I was part and parcel of the kingdom and not separate from God. Yet I wasn't God in the sense of I didn't create myself, which is what the Course says, which is what Jesus says. So when I begin to remember that safe psychological distance that offers me comfort in the recognition that I could be a passerby and just sort of watch what's occurring from this other perspective of certainty that is not found within the world but is found within me. And that's what this lesson to me is all about, because I can't recognize God as having a name in the same way that I have a name that's different from someone else's name, and that name sort of associates with what's been carved out and differentiated from everything else. It's not that way. God is a totality. It's not. I wouldn't even say. It's hard to picture God as a name, as an object. I can't do it any longer, although I used to. That's what I used to think. There was a subjective God that I was at a distance from, and I was here and down here, and he was up here watching me, and his observation of me had something to do with what was going to occur to me later on in life or after life ended here. It's no longer that way. Although that is a traditional way in which most people have been thinking about God, and in the lessons, in the doing of the lesson of the Workbook of A Course in Miracles, that's what we're releasing ourselves from. We have these new ideas being introduced in our mind about God that are not, let's call it, how do I say that? They're not consistent with our old ideas, and one or the other has to go. And depending on what we think God is, one is valuable and one isn't. When we know God as a totality, when we know God as being only love, then calling upon the name of God, the name of that reality in its totality, removes me from the attachment to this world of space and time wherein which I think I operate. It gives me this little psychological distance that I feel in my heart and my mind that represent, in a sense, release and freedom and a sense of safety that was not there prior to my having had the experience of God as the totality of reality, and myself included in. When I had this idea of the objective God, that space felt like I was trying to escape and run away. And that's the cause of our pain, is that separation, that space, that psychological space that we try to maintain between God as an object and ourself as an object is the source of our pain. And when we no longer have the need to maintain that psychological space because quite frankly, there's nothing to be afraid of and no reason for us to consider ourselves to be separate, then here in space and time, that psychological space becomes a place in which we step back and watch the world pass by from a position of wholeness, of safety, of recognition of what love is. And today's lesson number 203, I am not a body, I am free, for I am still as God created me, brings back to my mind the recognition of the truth of who I am, and the falsity of what the illusion is as not having any as being nothing. Now, the human mind has a problem with nothing because it thinks nothing is something. It can't picture, we live in a dualistic condition, so we picture nothing and something, nothing and everything. Like there's everything and then there's nothing, as if both can coexist, and in reality they can't. And yet in the duality of existence that we seem to utilize here in space and time in order to maintain the distanciation from everything and to keep ourselves separate. We do. And we think that it's necessary. And the energy that we utilize to keep ourselves separate is the energy that brings us the pain from the maintenance of an experience that is not true and has no reality and is impossible. So there's a certain futility, and we experience that futility in our lives. And we think that futility is for all manner of reasons until we discover it's the futility of trying to maintain separation as a true condition when it's not. And when we're finally released from the need to do that, the amount of pressure that we take off ourselves literally allows our heart and our mind to relax, and we can be back in love rather than trying to maintain the fear of God based on the guilt that we experience from who knows what cause. And now that we know there is no cause for guilt because God is only love, while we still may have the memory of it that we're utilizing now to remember, we still may have the memory of it. When we remember the idea of guilt, it helps us in a sense, remember that we are forgiven as well. That's the turnaround that happens in A Course in Miracles. That's the great reversal. We learn to use the forgetting to remember. And the forgetting is the condition that we find ourselves in space and time, in which we've forgotten our own true, whole, perfect, eternal nature and the abundance of the kingdom. So when I call upon God's name, which is my own, of course it delivers me. It doesn't, notice the wording too. The wording is so beautiful. The name of God is my deliverance from every thought of evil and of sin. It doesn't say from sin and evil, because sin and evil don't exist. Yet thoughts of sin and evil exist in our mind, and that's what we're delivered from. We're given an experience that shows us that the thinking that we were utilizing to torture and imprison ourselves is no longer true. So therefore we could utilize that thinking now to rejoice at the remembering of reality rather than forgetting. It is interesting the way it's worded. It's so perfect in Jesus' mind, in the healed condition that it in. Doesn't make mistakes, and is completely consistent in the way in which he presents things. So the name of God is my deliverance from every thought of evil and of sin, not from evil and of sin, because evil and sin don't exist. Yet in our mind we harbor these thoughts that foster the remembrance of the effects of separation, which are guilt and fear. And now, when we remember God's name, which is our own, our inheritance, because we are one, and the Spirit of God is one, more and more, under the auspices of Jesus and the Workbook of A Course in Miracles, and what we're learning, we're remembering an experience that is not of this world, that shows us that the world has no reality, nor does it have the ability to control our destiny and determine what, in a sense, our outcome is. So we are free. You're not a body. You are free, for I am still as God created me. And as we go along, you're going to begin to understand the absurdity of the idea of thinking that death can solve your problem. And it'll become totally reasonable to you that being eternal, you no longer have to undergo the type of death experiences that you've been undergoing in order to try to escape from the guilt and fear. Your mind is going to be healed of the guilt and the fear, so there's going to be no need to escape. So the way in which we transition now will become different. It won't be an escape from the world. It'll be a release from our thoughts about the world and the recognition of where we always have been and can never escape from because of the eternal nature of who we are and what our reality is.